She's just the help. Somebody move her before she ruins the floor. Those were the first words I heard as the ballroom tipped sideways, and the man who said them was the man I had loved for 2 years. My knees hit the marble first. Then the silver tray, ringing beside my ear like a bell no one came to answer. 200 faces floated above me in candlelight, powdered and perfect, and not one of them bent down. I had carried trays across that floor since 4 o'clock that afternoon. I had not eaten since the morning before. My hands still smelled of the polish I had rubbed into the banisters at dawn, and my feet had stopped being feet somewhere around the 3rd hour. I told myself I only needed a wall. I found the edge of the dessert table instead, and the room went white, and then I was down. Damon stood over me in his tailored charcoal suit, the one I had steamed and pressed that afternoon, and he did not reach for my hand. He looked at me the way you look at a spill. She works for the house, he told the guests, laughing that soft laugh I used to think was warmth. Long night. You know how it is. I knew how it was. I knew that 6 months ago this same man had knelt in a rented kitchen and slid a ring he could not afford onto my finger and told me that once the family business steadied, once the wedding money came together, we would be equals under one roof. I knew that the roof had turned out to be his mother's estate and that the ring had gone back into a drawer for safekeeping, and that somewhere between the promise and the present I had become the woman who ironed his shirts and answered his door and slept in the narrow room off the pantry. Now I was the woman on the floor and he was stepping over me. Somewhere above me a woman in champagne silk made a small sound of disgust and lifted the hem of her gown so it would not touch me. That was Vivian. I would learn her name properly within the hour, but I already knew the shape of her, the way you know the shape of a storm before you know its name. She was the reason the ring had gone into the drawer. She was the richer bride. Her father owned 3 banks and half a harbor, and Damon had looked at her the way he had once looked at me, and that was the whole story, told in one glance across a crowded room. My cheek was against the cold stone and my breath came shallow, and I remember thinking, with the strange calm that comes when a body has given everything it has, that no one in this bright and beautiful room considered me a person who could be hurt. And then something changed in the air. I felt it before I saw it. The laughter thinned. A ripple moved through the crowd, the way water moves when something large shifts beneath it. Shoes turned. Conversations stopped mid-word. From where I lay I could see a corridor of legs part, and at the end of it a pair of black shoes, unhurried, walking toward me across a floor that had refused to let anyone kneel. The room had been loud my whole shift. Now it was not. A man crouched down beside me. I could not see his face at first, only a dark sleeve and a pale, steady hand that came to rest an inch above my shoulder, close enough to help, careful enough not to presume. "Don't get up yet," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised because it had never once been ignored. "Breathe first." I breathed. He waited. He did not haul me upright to end the scene, the way Damon would have. He simply stayed, crouched on the marble in a suit worth more than everything I owned, while the wealthiest room in the county held its breath and watched a stranger tend to the help. "Elias." Vivian's voice cut in, bright and brittle. "You don't have to, she's staff." The man did not look up at her. He looked at me. His eyes were a cold gray, the gray of water under winter light, and when they found mine something crossed behind them that I had no name for yet, something that looked, impossibly, like recognition. His jaw tightened. His hand lowered the last inch and steadied my shoulder, warm through the thin cotton of my uniform. "What's your name?" he asked, quietly, only for me. Behind him Damon had gone very still, the laughter drained clean out of his face, and I watched my golden, careless Damon look at this silver-eyed stranger the way a man looks at a debt he prayed would never come to the door. "Naomi," I whispered. My voice barely made it out. "Naomi Carter." Something moved in the stranger's face, a crack in a wall that had clearly not cracked in years. His hand did not let go. And in the silence where 200 people waited to see what a man like that would do, I heard him say, so softly that only I could hear it, "I have been looking for you for a very long time." He helped me up. Not by lifting me like a sack, but by offering his forearm the way a man offers it to someone he considers worth the courtesy, and I took it because my legs would not have carried me otherwise. The moment I was on my feet, the room remembered how to move again. Vivian swept in like weather. "There we are," she sang, sliding herself between me and the silver-eyed stranger, all teeth and diamonds. "No harm done. Naomi, be a dear and see to the wine you spilled earlier. It's still on the floor by the east table, and we can't have guests slipping." She said it lightly, as if she were doing me a kindness by giving me somewhere to put my shame. And just like that the whole evening came rushing back over me, every minute of it. 2 hours before I fell, I had been crossing the east side of the ballroom with a tray of glasses when Vivian had reached out, without looking, and tipped one. Red wine, a whole glass of it, straight down the front of her own gown, and then she had turned to the circle of laughing guests and said, "She bumped me." She had not even bothered to make it convincing. She had simply decided it was true, because in that room her word was heavier than mine, and everyone had laughed the easy laugh of people who would never be blamed for anything. I had knelt. I had knelt on the marble in front of 40 strangers and blotted the wine from the hem of a woman who had spilled it on herself, and she had watched me do it with a small, satisfied smile. And when I finished, she had opened her little jeweled purse and dropped a folded bill onto the wet floor beside my hand. "For your trouble," she'd said. A tip. She had tipped me like a valet, in front of the man I had once been promised to, and Damon had stood 4 feet away and studied the ceiling as though the chandelier had personally asked for his attention. I had picked up the bill because I needed it and hated that I needed it, and I had gone back to the kitchen and pressed my back against the cold tile and breathed until my hands stopped shaking, and then I had gone back out and carried more trays. Because that is what the help does. That is what I had become. So when Vivian told me now, in front of the stranger, to go and clean the wine again, I understood the true shape of it. It was not about the floor. It was about the floor being the only place a woman like me was allowed to be seen. I bent to go. I always bent to go. But the stranger's voice stopped me. "Leave it." He did not raise his tone. He simply set the words down in the middle of the room like a stone dropped into a pond, and the ripples reached every corner. "She's not cleaning anything else tonight." Vivian's smile flickered. "Elias, honestly, she's staff. It's what she's. I heard you the first time." He turned his gray eyes on her, unhurried, and I watched a woman who had spent the whole night making people small get made small in a single glance. "You've said it 3 times. Once more, and I'll start to think you need me to believe it." The silence that followed had a texture. Damon stepped in then, finally, smoothing his tie, wearing the smile he used on people he owed money to. "Elias, my friend, you've had a long trip. Let me get you a drink. This is all just a misunderstanding. Naomi's had a fainting spell. She's fine, is she?" The stranger did not phrase it as a question. He looked at me, at the gray uniform gone dark with sweat, at the tray I had somehow still not been allowed to set down, at the folded bill I realized I was still holding crushed in my fist, and something in his face went cold and very quiet. "She's been on her feet since before I arrived." I counted. "She has served this room for 6 hours and eaten nothing, and when she fell, the host of this party stepped over her." His voice never rose. That was the terrible part. It never rose, and yet every person in that ballroom heard it, and every person looked away from Damon at the same time, the way a crowd looks away from something it is ashamed to have watched. Damon's ears went red. Vivian's jaw worked. And I stood in the middle of all of it, holding a tray I did not want and a bill I hated, and for the first time in 6 months a room full of people looked at me and did not see the help. They saw a woman who had been wronged, and they saw a man who did not intend to let it stand, and the space between those two things was so unfamiliar that my eyes stung. The stranger reached out and, very gently, took the tray from my hands and set it on the table himself. "Go and sit down, Miss Carter," he said. "You've done enough for these people to last a lifetime." I went. And as I crossed that floor for the last time as their servant, I felt every eye follow me, and I did not yet understand that I had just watched the balance of an entire room change hands. They sat me on a bench in the side hall where the coats were kept, away from the music, and for a while I was alone with the smell of wool and cold night air leaking under the garden door. My heartbeat slowed. My hands remembered they were hands. Through the wall I could hear the party stitch itself back together, the laughter rising again now that the awkwardness had a room between it and them, and I sat there in my ruined uniform and let myself feel, for one honest minute, how tired I was. Not the tired of a long shift. The tired of a long betrayal. The tired of pouring 2 years of yourself into a man and watching him spend you like small change. That was when I heard the small footsteps. A little girl came around the coat rack, maybe 6 years old, in a dark green party dress with the sash already coming untied, holding a glass of water in both hands the way you hold something you are terrified to drop. She had fine pale hair and serious eyes, and she walked toward me with the careful concentration of a child on an important mission. "I saw you fall down," she said. "So I got you water." She held it up to me with both hands. Some of it had sloshed onto her dress, and she hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. I took it because refusing would have broken her heart, and I drank, and it was the first kind thing anyone under that roof had done for me in longer than I could remember. "Thank you," I said. "That was very brave of you, crossing that whole big room by yourself." She nodded, satisfied, and then she climbed up onto the bench beside me uninvited, The way small children do when they have decided you are safe. She looked at my hands where they held the glass. She looked for a long time, her small brow furrowed, as if she were reading something written there. "Your hands are nice," she said finally. "They're kind hands." I laughed softly, surprised. "How can a hand be kind? They just are. You can tell." She swung her feet. "My daddy had a lady with kind hands." At the end, she sang to him so he wouldn't be scared. Something in me went very still. I did not know why. At the end of what, sweetheart? She didn't answer that. Children rarely answer the questions we most want answered. They answer the ones we didn't know to ask. She held his hand all night, the little girl said, matter-of-factly, arranging the words the way you arrange a story you have been told many times, but do not fully understand. "Uncle Elias says she was an angel, but I think she was just a lady. He looked for her, but he couldn't find her. He still looks." She leaned her head against my arm, easy as anything, and I sat frozen with a glass of water in my kind hands while a cold finger traced its way down my spine, though I could not have told you why. "What's your name?" I asked. "Lily," she said. "Lily Kane." Kane. The stranger's name. Elias. I turned the pieces over and could not make them fit, only felt the edges of something I wasn't ready to see. "And Elias is your uncle. He takes care of me now." She said it simply, the way children state the facts of their lives. "Since my daddy went away." Daddy's name was Caleb, but everybody just says my daddy. She looked up at me. "You have a nice face too. Are you going to work here forever?" And there it was, the question, small and enormous. Was I going to work here forever? Scrub this family's floors and iron the shirt of the man who had traded me and hand my dignity across the counter every day for a folded bill dropped on a wet floor? A week ago I would have said yes, because I could not see any door in the walls that had closed around me. But something had shifted tonight. A stranger had crouched on the marble and told me to breathe. He had taken the tray from my hands. He had said, so quietly, that he had been looking for me for a very long time, and I had not understood it then, and I did not understand it now, but I felt the truth of hope moving through me for the first time in months. Thin and stubborn as a green shoot through concrete. "No," I heard myself say. "No, Lily. I don't think I am." She smiled, pleased, as if I had given the right answer to a test only she was grading. Then a shadow fell across the doorway, and I looked up, and Elias Kane was standing there in the hall light, watching his niece lean against a fainting maid as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But he wasn't looking at Lily. He was looking at my hands around the glass, and his face had gone the color of ash, and his own hand had come up to grip the doorframe as though the floor had tilted under him the way it had tilted under me. "Lily," he said, and his voice was not steady now. "Where did you hear that story? About the lady who sang?" Lily blinked up at him, confused by the question. "You told me, Uncle Elias." And Elias Kane looked at me like a man seeing a ghost he had prayed for. He didn't ask me anything else that night. That was the strange part. For one long moment Elias Kane stood in that doorway looking at me as if the walls had fallen away, and he could see straight through 3 years of his own life, and then he closed whatever had opened in his face. The way a man closes a door on a room he cannot afford to stand in. "Lily," he said, quiet again, controlled again. "It's late. Say goodnight." Lily hugged me around the middle before she went, quick and fierce, and whispered, "I hope you don't work here forever," into my sleeve, and then she took her uncle's hand, and they were gone. And I sat alone in the coat hall not understanding anything except that the ground under my life had begun to move. I found out who he was an hour later, from Damon. I had gone back to my narrow room off the pantry to peel the ruined uniform from my skin, and Damon was waiting for me in the dark of the service corridor, and he grabbed my arm the moment I passed, harder than he ever had before. "What did you say to him?" Not a question. His fingers dug in. The charm was gone. What was left underneath it was something I had spent 2 years refusing to see. "What did you say to Elias Kane?" "Nothing," I said. "I fainted. He helped me up." "Let go, Damon, you're hurting me." He let go, but only because holding on cost him something, and he ran both hands through his golden hair, and I saw, in the thin light of the service hall, that my careless Damon was afraid. I had never once seen him afraid. "Do you know who that man is?" he said. "Do you have any idea whose house you're standing in?" "Your mother's house." He laughed, and it was a terrible sound, nothing like the laugh I used to love. "My mother hasn't owned a brick of this house in 2 years. He does. Elias Kane owns the mortgage, the loans, the cars, the vineyard, the note on my father's business, all of it. Every dollar this family breathes, it breathes because he lets us. Do you understand? We don't host Elias Kane. We perform for him. Tonight was he stopped himself. His jaw worked. Tonight was supposed to prove we were still worth something. And you fainted on the floor and made him crouch down like you were somebody. I didn't ask him to. It doesn't matter what you asked. He stepped close and his voice dropped to the flat, ugly whisper of a man passing along a fear he cannot hold alone. Listen to me, because I'm only going to say it once, for your own good. Men like Cain don't forgive debts and they don't forget faces. You know what they say about him? He doesn't collect in money. Anybody can collect money. He collects in people. He waits. He watches. He finds the thing you can't afford to lose, and he takes it, quietly, and by the time you understand what happened it's already done. He has been circling this family for 2 years, and the smartest thing you can do, the only thing you can do, is make yourself invisible. Serve the drinks. Keep your head down. Don't let him look at you again. Because the moment a man like that decides he wants something in this house, it stops being ours. I should have felt afraid. Part of me did. My heart was going hard against my ribs and my arm still ached where he'd gripped it. But underneath the fear another thing was uncurling, slow and quiet, and it took me a moment to name it, and when I did it frightened me more than Cain ever could. It was this. Damon was terrified of losing the things he owned, and I was one of them. He was not warning me for my safety. He was guarding his property. Which thing, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Which thing can't you afford to lose, Damon? The house? Vivian's money? Or is it me? Am I on the list of things a man like that might take? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The flesh that crawled up his neck answered for him, and I understood then, standing in a corridor that smelled of bleach and old bread, that I had never been a person to Damon Whitlock. I had been an asset that had recently started losing value. And somewhere upstairs, in a house he no longer owned, a silver-eyed man who collected in people had crouched on the floor and told me to breathe, and had looked at my hands as if they were something he had lost a long time ago, and had told me he had been looking for me for a very long time. That night I lay awake on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and was afraid, but I could no longer tell of what. Of the man who owned the roof over my head. Of the man who had promised to marry me and now warned me into the shadows. Of the strange gravity that had entered my life and started, gently, to pull. I thought of Lily's small voice. She held his hand all night so he wouldn't be scared. He still looks. And far off in the dark house, I heard a door close, soft and final, and I did not sleep. Elias Cain did not leave after the party. He had rooms in the east wing of the estate he owned but rarely used, and now he used them, and he brought Lily, and for a week the household moved around his silence like water around a stone. Damon smiled too much at breakfast. Vivian found new reasons to be elsewhere. And I kept my head down and served the drinks, exactly as I'd been told, and told myself I felt nothing when the gray eyes found me across a room, which they did, more often than an owner should have looked at a maid. On the 6th night, the fever came. I was awake anyway. I had stopped sleeping well in that house. I heard it through the old walls a little after 2 in the morning, a child crying the particular broken cry that means something is truly wrong, and I was up and moving before I decided to move, down the dark service stair and along the east hall in my bare feet. Lily's door was open. She was tangled in her blankets, cheeks flushed and angry red, hair stuck to her forehead, and when I put the back of my hand to her skin the heat of her frightened me. Burning. No one else had woken. The great house slept its expensive sleep, and the child in it burned alone. I did what my hands knew how to do. Before the Whitlocks, before Damon, I had spent 4 years as a care aide, sitting with the sick and the dying in rooms nobody wanted to enter, and my body remembered the work even when my heart had forgotten it was worth anything. I ran a cloth under cool water and folded it across her forehead. I stripped the heavy blanket and left the thin one. I lifted her against my shoulder and got a few sips of water into her, and I talked to her low and steady the whole time, the way you talk to someone whose fear is bigger than their body. There now, Lily girl. I've got you. You're not alone. I've got you. She clung to me, small and hot and shaking, and she whimpered for her daddy, and I did not tell her that daddies who go away do not come back, because she already knew that, and knowing it at 6 in the middle of a fever is a cruelty no fact can fix. So I did the only thing left. I sang. It was an old song, one my grandmother had sung to me, slow and plain, more breath than melody. I had sung it in 100 sick rooms. I had sung it to strangers whose names I never learned, in the last hours when the machines went quiet and the families had not made it in time, because no one, I believed, no one at all, should have to leave this world without a hand and a voice. I had sung it once, 3 years ago, to a man dying in a county ward, a man abandoned and ruined and alone, whose hand I had held from midnight until the gray light came up, whose face I could no longer clearly remember, but whose grip I could still feel if I let myself. I sang it now to his daughter, though I did not know yet that she was his daughter, and Lily's shaking eased, and her breathing lengthened, and the fever loosened its grip an inch, and her small fingers went slack in mine as sleep finally took her. And it was then, in the hush after the song, that I felt the doorway change. I looked up. Elias Kane stood in it. I don't know how long he had been there. He was in a plain dark shirt, no jacket, no armor, and the man who never showed anything on his face was showing everything on it now. He had gone white. His hand gripped the doorframe the same way it had a week before, knuckles pale, as if the house had tilted and only that would held him upright. His eyes were fixed on me, on my hands around his niece's hand, on my mouth still shaped around the last word of a song, and his jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jump, and his eyes, those cold winter eyes, had filled and were shining wet in the low light. He did not speak. He could not, I think. He just stood there and looked at me holding the sleeping child and singing the song, and I watched the last of his composure crack straight down the middle, quietly, the way ice cracks on a deep lake, no sound but a shudder that goes all the way to the bottom. Where he finally managed and stopped. Swallowed. Tried again, barely a whisper. Where did you learn that song? My grandmother, I said softly, so as not to wake Lily. I used to sing it. At work. Before. Before what? Before I came here. And then, because he was still looking at me like a drowning man looks at the shore, I added the thing I had never told anyone in that house, the thing I did not know was a key turning in a lock. I used to sit with people. At the end. So they wouldn't be alone. Elias Kane closed his eyes, and a single tear went down the face of the most feared man in the county, and he whispered, so low I almost lost it under the sleeping child's breath, "It was you. All this time. It was you." He left before I could ask him what he meant. He said it once, "It was you," and then he turned and walked out of the room like a man who has seen something he is not ready to survive, and I was left in the blue dark with a sleeping child and a heart full of questions that had no bottom. It was you. What was me? I lay awake the rest of that night turning it over, and, by morning the questions had teeth. Caleb. Lily's daddy, Caleb. A man who went away. A lady with kind hands who sang to him at the end so he wouldn't be scared, whom Elias had searched for and never found. I did not let myself finish the thought. It was too large. It stood in the corner of my mind like a shape under a sheet, and I was afraid that if I pulled the sheet away I would recognize the face. The chance came 2 days later. Vivian, playing hostess in a house she was desperate to be mistress of, sent me to make the study presentable, before a meeting between Damon's father and the bank, the study in the East Wing, the one Elias used. I let myself in with the ring of keys they still trusted me to carry, and I meant only to dust and go. But the desk was covered in papers, and I am not made of stone, and one photograph lay face up on the blotter where anyone might see it. I picked it up before I could stop myself. It was a man in a hospital bed. Thin, gray, worn down to almost nothing, the way people look at the very end when the body has already begun to let go. But his eyes were open and there was a hand in his, a woman's hand, and though the photograph only showed the woman's arm I felt my own arm go cold, because I knew that room. I knew that bed. I knew that man. 3 years fell away, and I was back in the county ward at 2 in the morning, holding the hand of a stranger everyone else had given up on, singing so he would not be afraid, and I remembered now that near dawn a nurse had come in and quietly taken a picture. For his family, whenever they come, and I had thought, they won't come, no one ever comes, and I had been wrong, because someone had come. Too late. But someone had come. The man in the bed was Caleb Kane. And under the photograph was the rest of it. A hospital bracelet, the cheap plastic kind, cut carefully so as not to break the printed name, kept all this time in a small clear envelope like something holy. And a stack of documents, and I should not have read them, but my hands were already turning the pages and my eyes were already moving, and the story they told rose up off the paper and closed around my throat. Loan agreements. A business partnership dissolved. A fraud, laid out in the flat language of lawyers, funds moved, signatures forged, a man's entire livelihood stripped away by someone he had trusted, someone who had drained him and walked away clean and left him to lose everything, his company, his house, his health, and finally, alone in a public ward because he could no longer afford anything better, his life. And on the bottom of the key document, on the line that mattered, in the loose confident hand I had watched sign for wine and cars and tailored suits, was a signature I would have known anywhere. Damon Whitlock. I stood in that study with the photograph in one hand and the proof in the other, and the whole terrible architecture of it assembled itself in front of me at last. Damon had ruined Caleb Kane. Damon's fraud had put that gentle man in that bed. And I, by pure blind chance, 3 years and a lifetime ago, had been the stranger who held Caleb's hand while he died, the woman Elias Kane had spent 3 years trying to find, the angel his brother's daughter still talked about. And now I lived under Damon's roof, wore Damon's family's uniform, was to be made invisible by Damon so that the man hunting him would not look too closely. The pieces fit so perfectly and so cruelly that I had to sit down. My legs simply stopped. It was you. All this time. Of course it was. The man who owned Damon's every debt was not circling this family over money. Money was nothing to him. He was circling it over a brother buried alone, over a fraud never answered for, over a photograph he had carried for 3 years of a hand he could not name. And into the middle of that long, patient, silent hunt, I had walked, carrying a tray, and fainted at his enemy's feet. You shouldn't be in here. The voice came from the doorway, cold and thin, and I turned with the papers still in my hands. Not Elias. Damon. He was standing in the study door, and his eyes had gone to the photograph, and to the documents, and to the signature I had not had time to hide, and I watched the blood drain out of his handsome face as he understood exactly what I had just read. Naomi, he said, very quietly, in a voice I had never heard him use. Put those down. And listen to me very, very carefully. Damon came toward me with his hand out and that soft, dangerous calm still in his voice. Give me the papers, Naomi. You don't understand what you're looking at. Whatever you think you saw, you didn't. That man was a business partner who made bad choices. People lose money. It happens. Give them to me and we'll forget you were ever in here. You forged his name. I heard myself say it. My voice did not shake, which surprised us both. You took everything he had. He died alone in a county hospital because of you. He died because he was weak. Damon's mask slipped all the way, and what was underneath was worse than I had feared, a man so hollowed out by wanting that there was no floor left in him. And you're going to be weak too if you don't hand me those papers right now. Who do you think anyone will believe? The heir to this house, or the maid who faints on the floor? Give them to me. No. He lunged for the papers. And a voice stopped him dead. Touch her, and every arrangement keeping you out of a courtroom ends tonight. Elias Kane stood in the study doorway. He had not raised his voice. He never raised his voice. But Damon froze with his hand halfway to mine as though the air itself had turned to iron, and slowly, he stepped back. Elias came into the room without hurry. He looked at the photograph in my hand, and the cut hospital bracelet, and the documents, and then he looked at me, and the cold went out of his eyes and left only the tiredness underneath. 3 years of it. You found it, he said quietly. I didn't mean for you to find it like this. Tell me, I said. Elias. Tell me the whole thing. Out loud. I need to hear it out loud. So he did. He stood in the center of that room, in the house he owned and had never wanted, and he told me the truth in a low, even voice while Damon stood pinned in the corner, unable to leave. I had a younger brother. Caleb. He was the good one, the soft one, my mother used to say, the one who trusted people. 3 years ago, he went into business with a man who was charming and quick and easy to believe. His eyes flicked to Damon and away, as if the sight cost him. That man moved Caleb's money into accounts Caleb couldn't see, forged his signature on loans, emptied him out over 18 months and vanished behind a wall of lawyers, and by the time Caleb understood what had happened, he had nothing. No company. No house. He'd remortgaged everything on this man's promises. His wife had already passed, there was only Lily, and me, and I was on the other side of the world untangling my own affairs, and I didn't. His voice caught, the only time it did. I didn't come home fast enough. He got sick. He couldn't afford anywhere decent, and he was too proud to tell me how bad it was, and he ended up in a county ward, in a room with 8 other beds, and one night his heart began to give out and no one reached me in time. He stopped. The room was so quiet I could hear the old house breathing around us. When I finally got there it was morning and he was gone. But a nurse stopped me in the hall. She said I shouldn't grieve that he died alone, because he hadn't. She said a young woman had come in off another ward near midnight, a care aide going off her shift, and had sat with him the whole night. Held his hand. Sang to him so he wouldn't be frightened. Stayed until the light came up. And then she'd gone home before anyone thought to ask her name. Elias looked at me, and his composure was gone, and what stood in its place was just a man. I looked for her for 3 years. I had people search every hospital, every agency. I had that photograph. I told my niece bedtime stories about the lady with the kind hands, because it was the only good thing in the worst year of my life, that my brother did not die alone, that a stranger gave him what his own family couldn't. I built my whole quiet war against this family around one grief and one gift. And then I walked into a party to look my enemy in the eye, and a woman fainted on the marble, and I crouched down to help her, and I took her hand. His voice dropped to almost nothing. And I knew it. Before you said a word. I knew that hand. It was you, Naomi. You're the woman who sat with my brother while he died. You held Caleb's hand all night so he wouldn't be scared, and you never even knew his name. The photograph trembled in my fingers. Across the room, Damon made a small sound, understanding at last the full size of what he had walked into, that the maid he had used and discarded and warned into the shadows was the one person on earth the man who owned his life would move heaven to protect. And I stood between the two of them, the man who had thrown me away and the man who had spent 3 years searching for me without knowing my face, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I understood that I had never been small. I had only been surrounded by people too small to see me. It was too much. The photograph, the song, the 3 years, the size of what I had been carried into, my body did what it does when the world asks more than it can hold. The room went white at the edges the way it had at the party, and I felt the papers slip from my hands, and I heard Elias say my name, sharp with alarm, and then the floor was rising up to meet me again. But this time I never reached it. This time a pair of arms caught me before the marble could, and lifted me clean off my feet, and held me against a chest that was not a stranger's anymore. I collapsed as their maid. I woke, hours later, held. He had not taken me to the narrow cut-off-the-pantry where I had slept for 6 months. He had carried me up the great staircase in front of the whole staring house and laid me in a real bed in a quiet room, and he had pulled a chair to the side of it, and he had stayed. All night. When I surfaced near dawn, weak and blurred, the first thing I felt was my hand inside his, both of his wrapped around it the way you hold something that might leave, and the second thing I saw was his face, unshaven and gray with sleeplessness, watching over me in the blue early light. He had not let go once. The most feared man in the county had sat by a maid's bed from midnight until morning and held her hand so she would not be alone, the way she once held his brother's, so the debt of that kindness could finally, quietly, be paid. You stayed, I whispered. You held my hand all night. You held his, he said simply, as if that settled everything, and perhaps it did. It was the only thing I've ever been able to give you back. I did not cry until then. I had not cried through any of it, not the fainting, not the tip on the wet floor, not Damon's hand on my arm. But I cried then, quietly, with my hand in his, because somewhere in the long dark he had turned me from a thing that could be used into a person who could be kept, and I had forgotten what that felt like. Justice came with the daylight, and it came without a single raised voice. Elias rose and washed his face and put his jacket back on, and became again the man the house was afraid of, and he sent for Damon and his father and Vivian and the family lawyer. And he had me brought a chair so that I sat in the room as an equal and not against the wall. Then, in that bright quiet study, he called it all due. Every loan. Every note. Every dollar the Whitlocks breathed. He laid the fraud documents on the table beside the photograph of his dying brother, and he told Damon, in a voice as calm as still water, that he could spend the next 10 years in a courtroom answering for what he had done to Caleb Kane, or he could sign a full confession sealed. Every asset signed over to a trust in Lily's name, the house, the vineyard, the business, all of it, restitution for a father she would grow up without. And his freedom in exchange for the one thing he had never given anyone, the truth, in writing with his own hand. Vivian understood first. Her fortune, her father's banks, the whole glittering future she'd traded me for, all of it rested on the Whitlock name, and the Whitlock name was rotten all the way to the root. And she gathered her coat and her diamonds and left without once looking at the man she had almost married. Damon sat at the table a long time. Then he picked up the pen. His golden confidence was gone. His hand shook as he signed, page after page, and I watched the man who had told 200 people I was just the help sign away everything he owned to keep himself out of a cell, and I felt no triumph. That surprised me. I felt only a vast, quiet stillness, like a room after the last guest has finally gone. When it was done, Elias turned to me, and he did the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. He did not tell me I was his now. He did not present me a place at his side as though I were the last asset changing hands in that room. Instead, he set a single folded paper in front of me, and I opened it, and it was not a contract and not a summons. It was a deed to my old life, bought back and made new. He had quietly purchased the lease on a shuttered building downtown, the kind of place a care aide might once have dreamed of, and put my name on it, and nothing else. No strings. No claim. You spent 3 years being taken from, he said. I'm not going to be one more man who decides what happens to you. This is yours, free and clear, whatever you choose to do with it and wherever you choose to do it. Stay. Go. It's the first thing in a long time that's only yours. He held out his hand, palm open, offering and not demanding. And for the first time in my life, a powerful man was letting me choose whether to take it. I did not take his hand that morning. I want to tell you I did, because that is how the story would go if I were only a woman in a story, but I was a woman who had spent 2 years being spent, and I had just been handed the first thing that was only mine, and I needed to hold it by myself for a while before I could reach for anyone. So I told him the truth. I said, I need to find out who I am when nobody owns me first. And Elias Kane, the man who collected in people, closed his open hand slowly and nodded, and said, then I'll wait. I've gotten good at it. And he did. That is the part one did not expect, that the waiting would be the proof. I left the estate that same week. I peeled the gray uniform off for the last time and folded it and left it on the narrow cot, and I walked out the service door I had come in through, and I did not look back at the house that had tried to make me small. The building downtown had good light and bad plumbing and my name on the deed, and I spent the first month just standing in it, learning the sound of my own footsteps in a room no one could order me out of. Then I got to work. I opened a school. Not a grand one. A plain, warm place with a hand-painted sign, where I taught the thing I knew better than anything in the world, how to care for the sick and the dying, how to sit with people in the rooms nobody else will enter, how to hold a stranger's hand at 2 a.m. so that no one at all, has to leave this world afraid and alone. I taught foster kids aging out of the system with nowhere to go, and single mothers who needed a trade, and quiet young people who, like me, had been told all their lives that they were only the help. I taught them that a folded bill dropped on a wet floor says everything about the person who drops it and nothing about the person who picks it up. I taught them that dignity is not something a room grants you, it is something you carry into the room. On the wall by the door I hung a small framed card, and on it I wrote the only thing I have ever truly believed: a hand held in the dark is worth more than anything owned. Elias came to the school sometimes. Never as an owner, there was nothing there for him to own. He came as a man, in plain clothes, and he'd fix the bad plumbing with his own hands and sit in the back while I taught and drive me home through the evening streets, and slowly, at the pace I set, and never once faster, the thing between us grew into something with roots. He never told me what to do. He never once decided anything for me. After everything he could have taken, the man took nothing, and that is how I finally learned to give. And Lily. Oh, Lily. She came every week, and then every few days, and then it was hard to remember a time she hadn't been curled in the corner of my classroom doing her homework while I taught. She started calling me by my first name, and then she stopped using any name at all and just started saying Mom, testing it out sideways one afternoon the way children test the ice on a pond, and when I didn't fall through. When I turned around with my whole heart in my face and said, yes, baby, she grinned like the sun coming up and never called me anything else again. Her father's photograph sits on my mantel now, next to Elias's and mine. I light a small candle by it on the night he died, every year, and I sing the old song, and Lily has learned the words, and now there are 2 of us who will make sure Caleb Kane is remembered by someone who loves him. He did not die alone. He does not stay forgotten. That is a kind of justice too, quieter than the courtroom, and longer lasting. Damon, I heard, moved to another state, and does something small and legal now, and I do not think about him much. That is the truest measure of how far I've come. The man who once held my whole future in his careless hands has become a person I simply do not think about. Vivian married someone with older money and a longer name, and I wish her exactly the life she chose. I hold no grudge against either of them. Grudges are heavy, and I have carried enough heavy things. I set that one down at the county line and drove on. We married in the spring, Elias and I, in the garden behind the school, with my students setting up the chairs and Lily walking ahead of me scattering flowers she'd picked herself. There was no crowd of 200 to perform for. There was no one there who did not love us. When it came time, Elias took my hand, asked for it first, with his eyes, the way he always did, and I gave it, freely, the first thing I had ever chosen with nothing forcing my hand. And I thought about the marble floor where a stranger had crouched down and told me to breathe. I thought about the long night he sat in a chair and held on so I wouldn't be alone. I thought about a county ward 3 years before that, and a dying man's fingers in mine, and a song in the dark, and how a single act of tenderness given to a stranger had traveled all that distance through all those years and come home to me at last. I collapsed in that house as their maid, the woman everyone stepped over. But the hand that reached down for me on that cold floor never once tried to own me. It only ever held on. And in the end, that made all the difference, not the power, not the debts called due, not the empire signed away in a bright quiet room. Only this, that when I finally fell, someone stayed. Someone held my hand all night. And when the morning came, I was still holding on, but this time, for the first time, because I had chosen to.